To the high-ranking, bowler-hatted bureaucrats of the British Air Ministry in the autumn of 1939, the strange machine taking shape in a secretive, converted manor house in Hertfordshire was not a weapon of modern war. It was a joke. It was an absolute, laughable regression in military technology. They openly called it the Wooden Terror, a name whispered through the corridors of Whitehall, not out of respect for what this aircraft could do to the enemy, but out of absolute, bone-chilling terror for the lives of the young pilots who would be strapped inside it. In an era where aviation was defined by the industrial roar of heavy steel presses, hydraulic metal benders, and the gleaming aluminum skin of monoplanes like the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire, the idea of a front-line combat bomber made entirely out of wood was treated as a dangerous, obsolete, and fragile suicide machine. To the military traditionalists, war was a game of weight, armor, and overwhelming defensive firepower. A proper bomber, by their strict doctrinal definitions, was a flying fortress. It was a massive, slow-moving behemoth, bristling with heavy, power-operated gun turrets in the nose, the tail, and the belly, wrapped in hundreds of pounds of dense steel armor plate to protect the crew from the lethal shrapnel of anti-aircraft flak. Yet here was Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, a stubborn, aristocratic visionary, proposing a twin-engine bomber with absolutely no defensive guns, no heavy turret mechanisms, and not a single shred of defensive armor. To the generals, his blueprint was a heresy. They branded it the cardboard bomber, predicting that the moment this fragile wooden toy encountered the explosive 20mm cannon shells of the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt interceptors, it would instantly splinter, catch fire, and disintegrate into a shower of burning toothpicks over the English Channel. But the skeptical bureaucrats had overlooked a fundamental, revolutionary secret hidden beneath that smooth, hand-polished wooden skin. By completely abandoning the heavy weight of steel gun turrets, complex ammunition tracks, and the multiple crew members required to operate them, Sir Geoffrey had bypassed the physical limits of conventional aviation. The Mosquito did not need heavy armor to survive, nor did it need machine guns to defend itself. It possessed a defense mechanism far more absolute: pure, unadulterated, untouchable speed. Strip the weapons, eliminate the drag, and the aircraft became an aerodynamic arrow. Down in the thick, dense air close to the ground, the Mosquito was so blindingly fast that it could sweep over a high-priority German target, drop its high-explosive payload with sniper-like precision, and disappear over the horizon before the defenders could even rotate their anti-aircraft guns. It did not fight the Luftwaffe. It simply ran away from them. This wooden construction, born out of desperate wartime metal shortages, yielded another revolutionary advantage that British engineers had never even planned for. Because its airframe was built almost entirely of organic timber, balsa, and plywood, rather than reflective sheets of aluminum, the Mosquito was practically an early, accidental stealth aircraft. To the German radar operators staring at their primitive cathode ray screens along the Atlantic Wall, the fast-approaching wooden bombers did not register as massive glowing threats. They appeared as tiny, fleeting, negligible blips on the glass, giving the Luftwaffe's air defense batteries only precious seconds of warning before the bombs were already tearing through the roofs of their command bunkers. How did an aircraft built of common household materials, plywood, balsa, and chemical glue, become the fastest, most versatile multi-role weapon of the entire Second World War? How did it manage to consistently outrun the Luftwaffe's finest piston engine interceptors and even humiliate their early, revolutionary jet fighters in vertical dogfights? Today we unmask the brilliant, defiant engineering of Sir Geoffrey de Havilland, the secret organic timber recipe that made the airframe nearly immune to structural fatigue, and the daring, low-level precision raids that humiliated Hermann Göring and drove the Nazi High Command to the absolute brink of madness.
This is the story of the juggernaut of the air, the spectacular, redemptive triumph of the wooden wonder. To understand how Sir Geoffrey de Havilland planned to conquer the skies, one must first understand the absolute heresy of his vision. In the late 1930s, as Europe slid inexorably toward total war, military aviation doctrine was locked in a dogmatic cage. Heavy bombers were designed like flying battleships, weighed down by massive power-operated gun turrets, complex ammunition tracks, and hundreds of pounds of dense steel armor plate. But de Havilland proposed a radical, almost treasonous equation: strip away the guns. He calculated that a single defensive turret, along with its gunner, heavy hydraulic lines, and thousands of rounds of ammunition, added massive weight and catastrophic aerodynamic drag. If you removed every single weapon, every ounce of armor, and every unnecessary crew member, you could build an airframe so light, clean, and aerodynamically perfect that its power-to-weight ratio would allow it to simply fly over, outdive, or outclimb any threat on Earth. The British Air Ministry, obsessed with heavy defensive firepower, dismissed the idea as suicidal fantasy. They could not conceive of an unarmed bomber surviving 5 minutes in a combat zone. But de Havilland's heresy went far deeper than stripping the weapons. He intended to build this high-performance machine entirely out of wood. In 1939, as Britain braced for a metal shortage that would choke their aircraft production lines, aluminum was a precious, highly rationed resource, desperately needed for Spitfires and Hurricanes. De Havilland realized that while metalworking factories were severely bottlenecked, Britain possessed a massive, completely untapped army of skilled labor: cabinet makers, piano manufacturers, and high-end furniture craftsmen. By utilizing timber, he could bypass the aluminum shortages entirely and put thousands of idle woodworkers to work. The material was cheap, abundant, and incredibly easy to shape. But to turn ordinary timber into a front-line combat machine capable of surviving the brutal stresses of high-speed flight, de Havilland's engineers had to develop a structural recipe that was as much chemistry as it was carpentry. The secret of the Mosquito's strength lay in a revolutionary high-tech organic sandwich. The fuselage skin was constructed by taking a lightweight 3/8-inch core of Ecuadorian balsa wood and sandwiching it between two thin, incredibly strong 3/32-inch outer skins of Canadian birch plywood. This composite sandwich was incredibly light, yet possessed a structural stiffness that defied its weight. To shape this wooden skin, workers molded the plywood balsa sandwich inside massive, highly accurate concrete and mahogany half-molds. The seams were meticulously hand-painted with cutting-edge synthetic adhesives, specifically casein and a revolutionary urea formaldehyde glue known as beetle glue. Once the two halves of the fuselage were joined and the glue cured under intense pressure, they formed a rigid monocoque shell. Because it was made of wood, the skin was exceptionally smooth and completely devoid of the thousands of drag-inducing rivets found on metal aircraft. It was a structural masterpiece, smooth as glass and incredibly aerodynamically efficient. Yet military critics remained deeply skeptical, warning that a wooden aircraft would rot, warp, and splinter under the extreme damp climates of European campaigns or the blistering heat of the Mediterranean. They believed wood was too unstable for the violent maneuvers of aerial combat. But wood possessed an extraordinary organic advantage that the metallurgy of the 1940s could not match. It did not suffer from metal fatigue. while aluminum wings slowly developed microscopic, invisible fractures under high-G dogfights and heavy turbulence, eventually leading to catastrophic structural failure. The Mosquito's massive, single-piece spruce wing spars absorbed immense structural stresses with unmatched natural elasticity. It was a brilliant marriage of organic material science and master craftsmanship, forging a wooden skeleton that was structurally tougher, pound for pound, than steel.
In the desperate smoke-choked summer of 1940, the Mosquito was nearly strangled in its cradle. With the British Expeditionary Force barely escaping the beaches of Dunkirk and the Luftwaffe raining thousands of tons of high explosives onto London, the survival of the United Kingdom hung by a microscopic thread. The newly appointed Minister of Aircraft Production, the ruthless and pragmatic Lord Beaverbrook, was tasked with a singular, brutal mandate: build fighters and build them now. Every spare ounce of steel, every sheet of aluminum, and every single factory hand had to be thrown into the production of Spitfires and Hurricanes to repel the German onslaught. De Havilland's wooden project, officially designated the DH-98, was viewed as an unnecessary, resource-draining luxury. It was repeatedly struck from the official war production program, labeled as a low-priority project, and nearly cancelled entirely by bureaucrats who believed Britain had no time to waste on wooden toys. But Sir Geoffrey de Havilland refused to let his masterpiece die. Operating in the absolute secrecy of Salisbury Hall, a moated manor house far from the eyes of German spies and British bureaucrats, his team of dedicated engineers worked in double shifts, eating and sleeping beside the wooden molds. De Havilland used his personal influence, directly appealing to Beaverbrook. He argued that the Mosquito would not consume a single ounce of the precious aluminum or steel earmarked for fighters, nor would it employ a single metalworker needed by Vickers or Hawker. It was a phantom program, utilizing a parallel, completely untapped workforce of domestic carpenters, coffin makers, and furniture manufacturers. Reluctantly, Beaverbrook relented, granting the program a tentative, highly fragile reprieve. It was a gamble of epic proportions, and the pressure on de Havilland's team was immense. If their wooden creation failed to deliver, it would be remembered as one of the greatest, most wasteful blunders in British military history. On November 25, 1940, the moment of truth arrived. The prototype, painted in a high-visibility yellow to prevent nervous British anti-aircraft gunners from shooting it down, taxied onto the damp grass of Hatfield Airfield. At the controls was Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the founder's brilliant and daring eldest son. The air was freezing, the ground slick with frost. As de Havilland Jr. pushed the dual throttles forward, the twin 1,230 horsepower Merlin 21 engines screamed, launching the lightweight wooden aircraft down the runway. It was airborne in seconds, climbing into the gray English sky with a vertical agility that shocked the engineers watching from the ground. It was an effortless, majestic display of pure physics. Without the massive weight of steel turrets and defensive armor, the wooden airframe was incredibly light, utilizing its power-to-weight ratio to carve through the sky like a knife. To officially prove its capabilities to a highly skeptical Air Ministry, de Havilland arranged a dramatic, head-to-head trial against the nation's absolute gold standard, the Spitfire Mark II. The generals watched from the tarmac as the two aircraft lined up in the sky. The Spitfire pilot pushed his engine to its absolute limits, but the Mosquito pilot simply opened his throttles. The results shattered every established dogma of the military establishment. The twin-engine wooden bomber did not just keep up with the Spitfire, it utterly humiliated it. The Mosquito reached an astounding top speed of 392 mph, nearly 22 mph faster than the fighter designed to intercept it.
the room full of skeptical military critics was silenced. In a single afternoon, the cardboard bomber had proven itself to be the fastest aircraft in the world. The Air Ministry immediately reversed its stance, issuing an urgent, high-priority order for immediate mass production. As the Mosquito entered active service in late 1941, it began to reveal another revolutionary, completely accidental property that changed the nature of aerial warfare. During its first combat sweeps over the North Sea, Luftwaffe radar operators stationed along the Atlantic Wall began to experience a bizarre, frustrating phenomenon. Their highly sophisticated Freya and Würzburg radar installations, which utilized high-frequency electromagnetic waves to detect incoming metal bombers at ranges of over 100 miles, were practically blind to the Mosquito. When a traditional metal-skinned bomber fleet crossed the channel, the metallic surfaces reflected a massive, unmistakable electromagnetic echo back to the German receivers, showing up as giant, glowing clusters on their screens. But wood behaves entirely differently. When the German radar waves struck the Mosquito's organic, non-conductive timber skin and balsa core, as well as the carbon-rich synthetic adhesives, they did not bounce back. Instead, the electromagnetic energy penetrated deep into the cellulose fibers of the birch plywood and balsa core, as well as the carbon-rich synthetic adhesives, dispersing and losing its intensity. The organic structure absorbed and scattered the radar waves, reflecting only a microscopic fraction of the signal back to the receiver. To the German operators, a fast-approaching flight of Mosquitoes did not look like a lethal bomber formation. It appeared as a tiny, flickering blip, indistinguishable from a flock of migratory birds or atmospheric static. By the time the German command centers realized the threat was real, the wooden intruders had already crossed their coastlines, dropping their payloads and vanishing back into the clouds. The Mosquito had become the world's first accidental stealth bomber. On January 30, 1943, the Mosquito was unleashed to perform one of the most audacious, psychologically devastating precision strikes of the entire war. The destination was Berlin. The objective was not strategic destruction, but absolute humiliation. Hermann Göring, the boasting chief of the Luftwaffe, who had famously declared that no Allied bomber would ever drop a single payload on the capital of the Reich, was scheduled to give a massive, nationally broadcast speech celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Nazi Party's rise to power. But right on schedule, as Göring stepped up to the microphone at the Air Ministry, the sky over Berlin tore open. 3 Mosquitoes from No. 105 Squadron, having flown hundreds of miles at treetop level to evade radar, swept directly over the city's rooftops. They dropped their 500-pound high-explosive bombs directly onto the main broadcasting station, severing the power lines. The national radio transmission went dead, leaving millions of German citizens listening to dead silence. Göring was utterly humiliated, later screaming in a fit of rage to his aviation generals. "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminum less than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft. They are geniuses, and we are the nincompoops." The extreme speed and low-altitude agility of the Mosquito soon transformed it from a standard bomber into a surgical scalpel. No raid demonstrated this clinical, point-blank precision more dramatically than Operation Jericho on February 18, 1944. Dozens of French resistance fighters, scheduled to be executed by the Gestapo in a matter of days, were held behind the thick, 3-story stone walls of the Amiens prison in occupied France. The Allied High Command devised an impossible rescue plan: use bombers to breach the prison's outer walls and destroy the guards' quarters without killing the prisoners inside. The mission required flying through a raging snowstorm at an altitude of just 50 feet above the ground, navigating by sight alone. It was a mission that would have been mathematically impossible for any other aircraft. Led by the daring Group Captain Charles Pickard, the Mosquitoes of the 2nd Tactical Air Force screamed across the snowy plains, popping up at the last second to drop their delayed action bombs. The bombs hit with sniper-like accuracy, skipping across the snow-covered courtyard to blow gaping, clean breaches through the outer 3-foot-thick masonry walls. Simultaneously, another flight of Mosquitoes pulverized the guards' barracks, killing the German garrison while leaving the prison wings holding the resistance fighters completely untouched. Over 100 French patriots escaped into the surrounding woods, saved from the firing squad by a wooden aircraft flying at point-blank range. By the final year of the war, the Luftwaffe introduced its ultimate technological hope, the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Capable of speeds exceeding 540 mph, the German jets were designed to sweep the skies of Allied bombers. Yet even against this cutting-edge threat, the wooden Mosquito refused to become obsolete. While the Me-262 was vastly faster in a straight line, it was heavy, possessed a terrible turn radius, and suffered from primitive turbine engines that would flame out if the pilot throttled up too quickly. The Mosquito pilots, utilizing their lightweight timber frames and superior low-speed maneuverability, developed highly effective evasive tactics. The moment an Me-262 locked onto their tail, the Mosquito pilot would execute a violent, tight, high-G bank that the heavy German jet could not hope to match without stalling or tearing its own wings off. The wooden wonder remained almost completely untouchable, proving that genius design could outmaneuver raw technology. The de Havilland Mosquito wasn't the only Allied underdog that survived impossible odds. If you want to know how a massive, bloated American fighter became an indestructible flying fortress that could survive 21 direct hits from explosive cannon shells, click on the video on your screen right now. Let us know in the comments, do you think the Mosquito was the most versatile aircraft of the entire war? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.